Leeds United transfer news keeps getting more and more and more complicated and annoying and painful for Leeds fans because we keep being linked with various players and they keep not coming. But we seem to be getting a little bit of progress on various moves recently, so let's have a little bit of discussion specifically about the striker position and all of the bits of new information that came out yesterday, because I think they're quite important and rather need to be discussed. Sorry I didn't do a stream or video yesterday, by the way. I was, and this isn't kidding, working on about a dozen Belgian Pro League match previews, so that was fun. Anyway, and if you haven't, please subscribe to the video so it means that I can do this more and less Belgian Pro League match previews. Anyway, diving into it. The first main bit of news surrounds Rodrigo Munes. Now, Rodrigo Munes is the player that Leeds have been most linked to throughout this window, and we all kind of know that that's the case. Various different sources have kept talking about Rodrigo Munes yesterday, specifically mentioning that the club are still viewing him as the number one target for the striker position. This is a thing that makes sense from certain perspectives because he's very, very obviously a good player. However, there's a couple of little concerning aspects about that. First of all, is the fact that we know there's other clubs interested in completing that same move. So we knew, for example, Newcastle had an interest, but Atalanta have an interest themselves in having sold the likes of Ademola Lookman in this window. We're potentially going to bump into some issues having to fight them for the player. Specifically, Atalanta put in a bid of something like 40 million euros, and that was rejected. It's something like 34.5 million pounds that translates to. So, with the amount that Fulham would actually want, which is close to 50 million euros, that pushes it beyond the 40 million pound mark, which makes it very, very difficult to justify as a Leeds United fan, because Rodrigo Munes, if we're going to sign him, is absolutely going to blow the club's transfer record out of the water. It's not even going to be particularly close. But I'm not 1,000% that he's going to be worth that. And if we do sign him, I hope he is. I hope he's a very, very good player. But it feels like moving on to other targets is probably wise. It's probably good to stop briefing the media saying he's the number one target now, considering all people are doing with that is saying, well, Leeds aren't getting the number one targets. And like, I know it makes sense that if you're very, very actively pursuing a player to say, well, if we do end up potentially signing him, it'll be because he knew that he was potentially like of interest to Leeds United. There's a point at which it doesn't necessarily help. Anyway, there are other players that Leeds United have been linked with in the past few days. One of them being Gonzalez over at Juventus. Nico Gonzalez is a relatively young striker, can play across the front line as well, so can play in those wide areas too, that I think has a very, very, very high ceiling. Everything that I've seen of the guy is effectively fairly mobile, decent with his movement, reasonable finishing as well, but he just didn't quite click when he was at Juventus. Now, a lot of people will look at that and go, well, I don't know if he's necessarily good enough for us then. We need to pay attention to the fact that he is in the same squad as Jonathan David, as Vlahovic. Those players are obviously going to get into a first 11 before him. They're obviously going to get onto the bench before him because they are next level footballers. Jonathan David moved to Juventus from, I believe, Lille, off the top of my head, because he was a player that was able to contend for titles. And Juve want to get from the current position that they're in, which is sitting below Inter and Napoli and occasionally Atalanta, and get back to where Juventus previously were. They want to get back to past glories, and that means investing in players like Jonathan David, which means leaving very, very decent players, but ones that aren't of that standard, such as Nico Gonzalez, behind. And that's completely okay. In terms of what it would take to do a deal for Leeds United, I'm not 100% sure. Never mind, I am, because I'm sort of looking at various details as I'm doing this video, because I'll be honest, it's 2:15 in the morning. I was playing a game called Peak with a few friends. It's very, very good, but you kind of lose track of time. I climbed 4 mountains and it took 2 hours. Anyway, Nico Gonzalez will reportedly be allowed to leave Juventus for £26 million this summer, and we're apparently interested in him. However, I was wrong a moment ago. Primarily plays in the wide areas. You see, this is why you got to be sort of switched on, and I'm not from time to time because I'm very, very tired. Anyway, let's continue. In terms of goals and assists that he managed to get at Juventus, he got 9 goals and assists across 38 games, but a lot of those games it was a case of coming on partway through as a substitute because he wasn't hugely relied upon. because, as mentioned, he wasn't quite that level of talent that Juventus necessarily wanted. However, at Fiorentina before that, 57 and 125. So he does have a lot of potential. It's about putting him in the right system that works for that. So Juventus, I've sort of noted whenever I've watched them for work, have put a lot of their focus through trying to get things to Vlahovic and make things work that way. That means, therefore, that in the wide area, he's not going to score as many, and you might struggle to get assists because... Sorry, I've got a very itchy face. Because, again, if you're pushing things through the wide areas to get them to the right player, you're not going to end up with the wingers getting the ball too much, which is why I think Nico Gonzalez has struggled over there. Specifically, what's been mentioned as his qualities are he's a maverick, he's aggressive, he's got a lot of quality to him, a lot of heart, a lot of grit, never holds back, which is sort of what you want in a player at Leeds United. You want someone who has that really, really, really high work rate. In addition to that, his wage is sort of affordable. So on currently 58 grand a week, which is not too much for a Premier League side, there's a belief that he'd want a little bit more if he comes to Leeds United, but we'd be able to sort of manage that because Premier League money, which means Premier League wages. I don't want to sound too Ken-based there. Sorry about that. Beyond that, there is a little bit more conversation around other number nines. So specifically, Artem Dovbyk over at Roma is a pretty damn big one that's consistently mentioned. He tends to be someone that isn't the quickest, but knows how to poach, which is quite fun. And for some reason, that Mitrovic rumour isn't going away. I'm going to stand by the fact that I wouldn't be super happy with Mitrovic if he was our signing. I think we need a slightly different profile to him. I think he's a little bit more Pirou-y in that his movement isn't the best, but his finishing will be absolutely deadly. I think we need someone who is able to press, who is able to bring energy to that forward line, and whilst Mecha can do that, he's also a bit injury-plagued. And Pirou can sometimes do that, but he doesn't look comfortable doing so. So someone of that profile, to me, is preferable over a Mitrovic. I think Munes would be that, so that would personally be my preference of the two. Dovbyk, not necessarily 100% suited to that. Van Aert is, again, one of the players that I would prefer to do that because he can do the movement, but we never know. We're not sure who we'll end up with just yet because that's how it works. But at the end of the day, all that is just what I think and what I've sort of researched on the go, I suppose. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, please pop a like on the video. That's massively appreciated, as is subscribing, because it sort of helps the channel to keep continuing on, as is becoming a member. It's $2.99 a month. You get videos like this one early and a bunch of other bits and bobs, which are quite nice. Anyway, hope you all enjoyed. I'm going to go to bed in a few minutes because I'm absolutely exhausted, and I'm going to dream of cartoon people climbing up a hill. And if you want to see that streamed, just ask, and I'll take a look at the comments, and if enough of you would like it, then I'll absolutely go for it. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. I will see you later. Toodaloo.